My name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm 67 years old. I have weathered hands, a bad knee that acts up when it rains, and a heart that has been broken more times than I care to count. I am not a rich man. I am not a powerful man. I am just a retired schoolteacher from a small town in Virginia, who spent 40 years pouring everything he had into the people he loved. And for a long time, that was enough. But on a cold Tuesday morning in February, I was standing in the kitchen of a little seafood restaurant on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, the restaurant I had scraped together every penny of my retirement savings to buy. When my phone rang, it was my brother-in-law Terence, my late wife's younger brother, the man I had helped put through college, the man I had lent money to not once, not twice, but 4 separate times over the years, the man who had stood at my wife's funeral and wept and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to his family. He didn't call to check on me. He didn't call to ask how the restaurant was going. He called to take it from me. And here is the thing about quiet men, the thing that people like Terence never understand. When a quiet man stops arguing, it is not because he has lost. It is because he has already won. He just hasn't shown you the cards yet. Stay with me. Because what happened when Terence walked through my door, I promise you, you are not going to see it coming. I need to tell you about Margaret before I tell you anything else, because none of this, not the restaurant, not Terence, not any of it, makes sense without her. Margaret Louise Hutchins, née Caldwell, was the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a dozen friends. She had this laugh, loud and completely unashamed. And when she was happy, she was so happy that it almost hurt to look at her. We met when we were both 23. I was a first-year English teacher at a middle school in Chesapeake. She was a nursing student working weekends at a diner near campus. I came in for coffee. She spilled it on me. I left my number on the napkin. That was it. That was the whole story. 41 years of marriage started with a coffee stain and a paper napkin. Margaret had a dream. She talked about it our whole lives together. She wanted to own a little restaurant by the water. Nothing fancy. Just a place where people could come in tired and leave full. Where the fish was always fresh, and the cornbread was always warm, and the sweet tea was always sweet enough. She had a notebook, a yellow spiral notebook with a sun drawn on the cover, and in it she had written the entire menu. Every dish, every price, every little detail, right down to the name she wanted to put on the sign. Maggie's Shore. We always said we'd do it when we retired. We'd cash out our savings, move to the Outer Banks where she'd vacationed as a little girl, and open Maggie's Shore together. But life is not always generous with its timing. Margaret was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March of 2019. She was gone by October, 7 months. That's all we had from the moment they told us. 7 months to say everything we hadn't finished saying. 7 months to hold hands in hospital rooms and watch sunsets and pretend, sometimes, that everything was going to be fine. On one of her last good days, she held my hand and she said, "Gerald, you open that restaurant. Don't you dare let my notebook collect dust. You open it, you name it what we said, and you make people feel welcome. You do that for me." I promised her I would. I am a man of my word. Part 3. Building the Dream. I retired from teaching in June of 2021. I was 65 years old, alone in a 3-bedroom house with a pension, a modest 401k, and a yellow spiral notebook. My son, David, was worried about me. He lives in Charlotte with his wife, Priya, and their 2 kids. Good people. David called me every Sunday without fail, and when I told him what I was planning, that I was going to sell the house, take the savings, and open Margaret's restaurant on the Outer Banks, he went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, are you sure? That's a big risk. Your mother asked me to." I said, "That's enough for me." He didn't argue after that. He and Priya even came down to help me look at properties. Priya, bless her heart, brought a spreadsheet. She'd researched the tourism season, foot traffic patterns, cost of commercial kitchen equipment, the whole thing. She sat at my kitchen table and walked me through it page by page, and I thought to myself that David had chosen very well. We found the property in August, a small building right off the main road in Kitty Hawk. It had been a bait shop years ago, and before that some kind of sandwich counter. It needed work. The floors needed refinishing, the kitchen needed a full overhaul, the dining room was cramped and dark. But the windows faced west, and in the evening the light that came through them was exactly the kind of light Margaret would have loved. I bought it with cash, almost everything I had. For 9 months I worked on that building. I hired a local contractor named Pete, who became something like a friend. I refinished the floors myself. My knees paid for that decision for weeks. I painted the walls a soft blue that Margaret had circled in a home magazine once. I hung old fishing photographs along one wall and put small hurricane lamps on every table. I opened Maggie's Shore in May of 2022. The menu was straight out of the yellow notebook: blackened flounder, shrimp and grits, a she-crab soup that made a food blogger from Raleigh drive 3 hours just to try it again. The cornbread was Margaret's mother's recipe. The sweet tea was sweet enough. People came, and they came back. And they brought other people. By the end of the first summer, we had a wait list on Friday nights. By the second summer, a travel magazine had named us one of the top 10 hidden gem restaurants on the Atlantic coast. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what this place meant. It wasn't a business. It was a promise kept. Every night when I turned off the lights and locked the door, I'd stand outside for just a moment and look up at the sign Maggie's Shore, and I'd say good night to her. That is the place that Terence called me about on that cold Tuesday morning in February. Gerald. His voice was smooth. That's the thing about Terence. He always sounds reasonable, even when he isn't. Terence, I said. Morning, how's the restaurant going? Good season. Good enough, I said. I was already cautious. Terence never called to ask about the restaurant. Good, good. Listen, Gerald, I need to talk to you about something. A business opportunity. Here is the part where I should tell you about Terence's business history, because there is a history. Terence Caldwell has been chasing the next big thing for 30 years, a parking lot business that collapsed in 2004, a vending machine franchise that lost money for 2 years straight, a food truck that broke down 6 times and was eventually repossessed, a real estate venture in 2017 that I lent him $20,000 for, which he assured me he would repay, and which I never saw again. I loved Margaret. I tolerated Terence. There is a difference. What kind of opportunity? I asked carefully. My partner and I are opening a waterfront entertainment complex. Marina, restaurant, bar, event space. Big investment. Big returns, Gerald. I'm talking serious money. We've got investors lined up. We just need to get the bank to release the final tranche of financing. That sounds like a lot of money, Terence. It is, but here's the thing, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. He paused. The bank wants additional collateral, a property, specifically a restaurant property with a proven revenue record. I set down the coffee cup I was holding. Gerald, I need you to sign Maggie's Shore as collateral for the loan. The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the ocean wind outside. I could hear the old refrigerator humming in the corner. Terence, I said slowly, you're asking me to put this restaurant up as collateral for your business loan. Temporarily, the loan comes through, we get cash flowing, we pay it down within 18 months, and your name comes off the collateral. It's standard practice. And if the loan doesn't get paid down, it will. But if it doesn't, Gerald, it will. I need you to trust me. I almost laughed. I did not laugh. I just breathed for a moment, and then I said, Terence, I can't do that. This restaurant is everything I have. it was Margaret's dream, and then his voice changed. The smoothness dropped away. What was underneath it was something harder and colder, and honestly, something I had always suspected was there. Gerald, I've been patient, but I want you to understand something. When Margaret passed, there was no will, not a formal one, and under North Carolina law, my family has a claim to assets that were partially funded by Terence, by marital funds that originated from the Caldwell Family Trust that Margaret received in 2008. Terence, stop. I have a lawyer, Gerald, and if you make me use him, I will. Sign the collateral agreement, or I will file suit and tie this property up in court for years. I sat down on the little stool in the corner of the kitchen, the one I sat on when I needed to rest my knee. I looked at the walls of this place I had built for Margaret, at the photograph on the shelf behind the register, the one of Margaret laughing on the beach, sunburned and happy, maybe 20 years ago. When were you thinking of coming by? I asked. This Friday, he said. I'm bringing my business partner, Derek. We'll have the paperwork ready. All right, I said. Come on Friday. Gerald, I want you to know this isn't personal. It's fine, Terence, I said. I'll see you Friday. I hung up, and then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my son, David. The second was to a man named Wallace Briggs, and the third was to my attorney, Carol Simmons. Here is the shocking twist. And I want you to understand, I did not see this coming either, not at first, but Wallace Briggs helped me see it very clearly. Wallace Briggs was not just any man. Wallace had been my financial advisor for 12 years, careful, thorough man who wore bow ties and kept meticulous notes. When I called him that Tuesday morning and told him what Terence had said about the Caldwell Family Trust, about Margaret's inheritance, about a potential claim on Maggie's shore, Wallace got very quiet. Gerald, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did Terence, at any point in the last year, ask you for copies of your financial records, business filings, anything like that? I thought about it, and then I remembered. Terence had called me about 8 months ago, asking very casually if I kept digital records of my business expenses. He said he was thinking about opening his own food service business and wanted to understand the bookkeeping. I had pointed him towards some software I used. I hadn't thought much of it. Gerald. Wallace said, I did some digging last month. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, but I have a colleague who works in commercial real estate financing in the Raleigh-Durham area, and about 6 weeks ago, he mentioned a deal he'd heard about. A waterfront entertainment complex, investors, bank financing. The same deal Terence is pitching me. Yes, but here's what my colleague told me, Gerald. The investors on that deal pulled out 3 weeks ago. Something about the primary partner's financial history, failed ventures, an unresolved judgment from 2019. The bank put the loan on hold indefinitely. I sat very still, so there is no deal, I said. There may be no deal, or the deal may be in serious trouble, but either way, Gerald, Terence doesn't need your restaurant as collateral to secure a legitimate loan. Then what does he need it for? Wallace paused. Gerald, I think you should talk to Carol Simmons before Friday. I called Carol immediately. Carol Simmons had been my attorney since 2015, a no-nonsense woman from Manteo who had helped me with the restaurant purchase and knew my financial situation in full detail. She listened to everything. Then she said, Gerald, I want you to come into my office tomorrow morning, and I want you to bring every piece of financial documentation you have for the restaurant, everything. I came the next morning, and what Carol showed me in that office changed everything. She had pulled the public records, the court filings, the business registrations. Terence's business partner, Derek Munro, had been the subject of a civil lawsuit in 2021 involving a restaurant property in Wilmington. The details were complicated, but the core of it was this. Munro and a partner had convinced a property owner to sign a collateral agreement on a restaurant. The associated venture had defaulted within 6 months, and the restaurant had been seized by the lender, a private lending group, not a traditional bank. The original owner had fought it in court and lost everything. It was not a loan they were trying to secure. It was a scheme to acquire a property. Gerald? Carol said, looking at me over her glasses, Terence Caldwell does not have a family law claim on Maggie's shore. Margaret's inheritance from the Caldwell Family Trust was gifted to her outright in 2008, and she used those funds for household expenses over a period of years, not for the restaurant. The restaurant was purchased entirely with your retirement funds and the proceeds from the sale of your Chesapeake house, both of which are solely in your name. His threat of a lawsuit is almost certainly a bluff designed to pressure you into signing. Almost certainly, I repeated. 99% certain, but we're not going to leave any room for that 1%. She smiled. Now, you said he's coming Friday with the paperwork. Good, let him come. What are we going to do? She told me. I listened, and when she was finished, I said, Carol, there's one more thing I need. What's that? I need it to happen in front of witnesses. I want people in that room when they arrive. She nodded slowly. How many people were you thinking? I thought of Margaret. I thought of the yellow notebook. I thought of the promise I had made her. Enough, I said. Part 6. Friday morning I woke up before dawn on Friday. I made coffee and I sat at the small table in the back of the restaurant, where I sometimes ate my meals alone, and I looked out at the window at the dark water and the first gray light beginning at the edge of the sky. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the first year we were married, when we had almost nothing, and she used to make soup from whatever was in the cupboard and call it something fancy to make me laugh. Tonight we're having surprise du pantry. She'd say in a fake French accent. The chef recommends it highly. I thought about the way she held my hand in the hospital. The way she made me promise, you open it, Gerald. You make people feel welcome. I was going to keep that promise. At 8 in the morning, David arrived. He had driven up from Charlotte the night before with Priya, and they had stayed at her rental cottage down the road, so as not to tip anything off. He came in through the back door, and I stood up, and he hugged me the way he did when he was a boy, pressing his face into my shoulder. How are you feeling, Dad? He asked, ready. I said. Priya squeezed my hand. We've got you. At 9, Carol Simmons arrived with her associate, a young man named James, who carried a large folder and a small recording device, which Carol noted calmly was entirely legal under North Carolina's one-party consent law, as I had consented and would be present. At 9:30, 2 other people arrived. The first was my neighbor, Pete, the contractor who had helped me build the restaurant. The second was a woman named Linda Oakes, who was the Dare County Business Registrar and who Carol had called in a professional capacity. At 9:45, I turned on the dining room lights, put on a pot of coffee, and set out the good cups. At 10 o'clock exactly, Terence Caldwell walked through the door with his business partner, Derek Munro. Terence looked surprised to see the room full of people. He stopped just inside the door, and I watched his eyes move across the faces, David, Priya, Carol, James, Pete, Linda. Derek Munro was a heavy-set man in an expensive coat, with a leather portfolio under his arm. He recovered faster than Terence. He smiled and extended his hand. Gerald Hutchins, Derek Munro, pleasure to meet you. I shook his hand. Sit down, please. Coffee. Terence had still not moved from the doorway. Gerald, what is all this? These are my people, Terence, I said simply. Sit down. He sat. He and Munro sat across from me, with the big table between us. Carol sat to my right. James sat beside her with his folder open. David and Priya sat at the next table. Pete stood near the door with his arms crossed. Linda sat quietly in the corner with a notepad. Before we get started, Carol said pleasantly, I want to review a few things. Mr. Munro, can you tell us the name of the lending institution for this loan? Munro glanced at Terence. Coastal Capital Partners, thank you. And can you tell us when this loan was formally approved? A pause. The approval is conditional pending the collateral documentation. I see. And who are the primary investors in the entertainment complex venture? Another pause. Longer this time. That's proprietary information. Of course. Carol opened her own folder. I ask because Coastal Capital Partners is not a registered lending institution in the state of North Carolina. It was registered as an LLC in Delaware in 2023 with Mr. Monroe listed as a managing member. It is not a bank. It is not regulated by the FDIC or any state banking authority. The table got very quiet. Terence, I said softly, I wasn't angry. I want you to understand that. I was tired, and I was sad, and I was something else I didn't have a word for yet. Did you know that? Terence looked at the table. He did not answer. Furthermore, Carol continued, we have reviewed the claim Mr. Caldwell made regarding a potential family law interest in this property deriving from the Caldwell Family Trust. That claim has no legal basis. Trust disbursement made to Margaret Hutchins in 2008 was an unconditional gift, spent in full prior to 2015, and has no bearing whatsoever on the purchase of Maggie's Shore, which was funded entirely by Mr. Hutchins's personal retirement assets. Terence, Monroe said quietly, you told me the claim was solid. It's solid, Terence said, but his voice had lost all its confidence. It is not solid, Carol said pleasantly. In fact, filing suit on the basis of this claim would constitute an abuse of process, and we would not hesitate to pursue sanctions. And then David spoke. My son had been quiet this whole time, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and quiet like mine, and I was so proud of him, I could barely stand it. Uncle Terence, he said, my dad helped you through college. He lent you money when your businesses failed. He never once asked for a public thank you. He never once made you feel small, and you called him and threatened to sue him over my mother's restaurant. My mother's restaurant? He paused. I just want to make sure you understand what you did. Terence looked at David, and for the first time since he'd walked in, something on his face cracked. Something real showed through. David, I'm not finished. David said quietly, my mother asked my father to open this place. It was the last thing she asked him, and he sold his house, spent his retirement, worked on this building with his own hands, and he did it. He kept his promise to her, and you tried to take it. The room was very still. The ocean wind moved outside. Monroe stood up. He picked up his leather portfolio. I think we're done here. You are done here. Carol agreed pleasantly. Monroe walked out without another word. Terence didn't move. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the wood, and he looked like a man who had just seen himself very clearly for the first time in a long while, and didn't like what he saw. I poured myself another cup of coffee. I offered one to Terence. He took it. I don't know why I offered it. Margaret would have offered it. Maybe that's why. Everyone else quietly gave us the room. Carol squeezed my shoulder on her way out. David held my gaze for a moment and nodded. Then it was just Terence and me at the table, two old men with coffee cups, in a restaurant named after his sister. I needed the money, Gerald, he said finally. His voice was very small. I know. I said. Derek told me it was a solid deal, that the collateral would never actually be at risk, that you'd never even know unless, Terence, he stopped. I would have helped you, I said. If you'd called me and told me the truth, that you were in trouble, that you needed help, I would have done what I could. I can't sign this restaurant away. I can't. But I would have tried to help you. He stared at his coffee cup. She would be very disappointed. I said. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it because it was true, and because I thought he needed to hear it. Margaret loved you. She worried about you her whole life, and she was proud of you when things went right. But this, I know, he whispered. She trusted me to take care of this place, and I will. We sat in silence for a while. The light came through the west-facing windows, that afternoon light that Margaret would have loved, soft and golden and full of the particular mercy that good light has. I'm sorry, Gerald, Terence said. I nodded. I don't know if that's worth anything. It's worth something, I said. It's not worth the restaurant, but it's worth something." He stood up, put on his coat, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked at the photograph of Margaret on the shelf, the one from the beach, sunburned and laughing. He looked at it for a long time, then he walked out. Carol filed a formal response with the court, preemptively documenting the lack of legal basis for any claim against Maggie Shore. Munro's LLC was subsequently investigated by the North Carolina Attorney General's office. Apparently, David and I were not the first people he had approached with this particular scheme. I do not know what became of him. I do not need to know. Terence called me once, about a month later. He didn't ask for anything. He just called to tell me he was moving back to Richmond to live near his daughter, that he was going to get some help with his financial situation, and that he was sorry again. I told him I hoped things would get better for him. I meant it. David and Priya took the kids to Maggie Shore for spring break that year. My grandchildren, Illy, who is 9, and Nora, who is 6, sat in the booth by the window and ate shrimp and grits and decided that Grandpa's restaurant was the greatest place on earth. Nora said she wanted to work here when she grew up. I gave her an apron. I went into my little back office that evening after everyone had gone, and I took out Margaret's yellow spiral notebook. I keep it on the shelf behind my desk, and I held it for a while. "We did it, Maggie," I said. "We still have it. I kept it. I don't know if the dead can hear us. I don't know if she was listening. But I believe she was. I believe she was sitting at one of those tables in the amber evening light, her laugh filling up the room, saying, 'I told you. I told you it would be fine.' I believe that. I have thought a lot about why Terence did what he did, and I've come to understand that desperate people do desperate things. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it forgivable overnight, but it makes it human. And Margaret raised me by example, by the way she lived, to see the human thing even when it's buried under the ugly thing. She also raised me again by example to be prepared, to be quiet, to not show my hand until the right moment. People mistake quietness for weakness. They see a man who doesn't argue, who doesn't raise his voice, who just says, 'All right, come on Friday,' and they think they've already won. They think his silence is surrender, but sometimes silence is a room being prepared. Sometimes silence is the sound of a man making 3 phone calls, and sitting down with his lawyer and gathering his people, and setting out the good coffee cups. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be ready. I am 67 years old. I have a bad knee and a restaurant by the water and a photograph of my wife on the shelf. I am not a rich man. I am not a powerful man, but I kept my promise. And every morning when I turn the key in the lock of Maggie's Shore and push open the door, and the smell of the sea comes through the windows, and the light falls across the blue walls and clean tables and the small hurricane lamps every single morning, I know something that I want to pass on to you. The people who love you leave things behind, dreams, notebooks, promises, and those things are worth more than any loan document, any threat, any scheme. Take care of what the people you love leave behind. Honor it. Protect it. Show up for it every single morning with your whole heart. Because love doesn't end. It just changes address. Mine lives in a little restaurant on the Outer Banks, on the corner of a road in Kitty Hawk, under a sign that says Maggie's Shore. And it is not for sale. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or a promise you made, or a dream worth protecting, please subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. There are more stories where this came from, and every one of them is about what really matters. I'll see you in the next one.